The colder the rain, the fewer people came down the logging road that cut through the Cascade foothills, and Sergeant First Class Lydia Farrow had spent the better part of 2 years making sure it stayed that way. She'd strung no trespassing signs along the fence line every 30 feet. She'd let the gravel wash out from the drainage ditch without bothering to fill it back in. She'd let the blackberry canes grow thick across the gate until the rusted chain was barely visible beneath the thorns. The message was clear to anyone who bothered to read it. Whatever was back here wasn't worth the trouble of getting to. Most people respected that. Ghost didn't count as people. Ghost was a Belgian Malinois, 71 pounds of scar tissue and muscle, with one ear that never stood up straight after a fragment caught it outside of Kandahar. He had been certified by the United States Army as a patrol and detection dog, had 3 deployments behind him, and had been cleared for retirement 6 months after Lydia was. They had been a team for 4 years. She didn't know how to explain that to anyone who hadn't lived it. The way a dog could know your breathing pattern before you did, could feel the tension moving through the leash, before your own hand registered what your body already knew. She didn't try to explain it anymore. She didn't talk to enough people for it to come up. The property was 11 acres, tucked into a hollow between 2 ridgelines in western Washington, where the Douglas firs grew so thick they blocked out the sky. By noon, there was a well, a wood stove, a generator she ran for 2 hours a day, and a chest freezer she restocked every 6 weeks when she drove into Inumclaw for supplies. She timed those trips for early Tuesday mornings, when the grocery store was quiet, and the self-checkout line meant she didn't have to speak to anyone at all. She had a system. The system worked. She had stopped asking herself whether working was the same thing as living. Ghost was the one who woke her on the morning everything changed. He didn't bark. He never barked without cause, and even then it was a single sharp sound, controlled, a tool rather than a reaction. What he did was pace. She felt him moving in tight circles at the foot of the bed before the pain in her shoulder blade even registered, before she understood that the low-grade ache she'd gone to sleep with had become something different overnight, something with weight to it, something that pressed against the inside of her ribs when she breathed. She sat up, and the room tilted. Lydia Farrow had been shot twice, had cracked 3 ribs in a vehicle rollover outside Jalalabad, had dislocated her shoulder so many times the joint made a sound now when the weather changed. She had a threshold for pain that civilian physicians tended to look at with expressions caught somewhere between admiration and alarm. So when she swung her legs off the cot, and the simple act of standing made black dots swim across her vision, she paid attention. Her skin was hot. She could feel it. The wrong kind of heat, radiating from somewhere under the surface. Not the honest heat of exertion, but something fever-bright and mean. She made it to the bathroom. She gripped the sink and looked at herself in the mirror and made a clinical assessment the same way she would have assessed a casualty on the field. Color bad, eyes glassy, breathing shallow. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck and counted. Heart rate too high. There was a cut on her forearm she'd gotten 3 days ago clearing brush from the fence line. She'd washed it out, wrapped it with gauze, and forgotten about it. She pushed her sleeve up now and looked at the skin around the bandage. The red lines radiating outward told her everything she needed to know. She stood there for a moment with the faucet running cold and let herself feel the full weight of the situation. Going to the hospital meant people. It meant questions. It meant explaining herself to strangers in a bright fluorescent room while they touched her and asked her to rate her pain on a scale of 1 to 10, which was a scale designed for people who'd lived softer lives than hers. Ghost sat in the bathroom doorway and watched her. "I know," she said. She hadn't spoken aloud in 4 days. Her voice came out rough and thin. She looked at Ghost. He looked back with those amber eyes that had always seemed to her to contain more patience than most humans she'd known, and she thought about what it had meant to him, the missions, the noise, the chaos, and what it meant to him now to have quiet and space and her constant presence. She thought about what would happen to him if she died up here in this hollow while the rain came down and nobody noticed. She grabbed her keys off the hook by the door. The drive to Valley General was 40 minutes on a good day. She made it in 35, which later she could not entirely account for, because her memory of the descent from the foothills was fragmented. The yellow center line swimming, the heater running, Ghost pressed against her side in the passenger seat with his head on her thigh, a warm and solid anchor. She remembered the parking lot. She remembered the sliding glass doors. She did not remember getting from one to the other. What she remembered was the look on the face of the triage nurse when the doors opened and she walked in with a military working dog in a tactical harness at her side. "Ma'am, animals aren't. He's a retired military working dog," Lydia said. Her voice was steadier than she feared. "And he does not leave my side." The nurse looked at Ghost. Ghost looked at the nurse. The nurse looked back at Lydia, took in whatever she saw in her face and posture and the particular color of her skin, and made a judgment call. "Sit down," she said. "I'll get someone." Lydia sat. Ghost positioned himself directly in front of her, facing outward, and that was the image that apparently traveled through the ER waiting room with some speed. Because within 3 minutes a physician's assistant came through the door at a pace that suggested someone had communicated the situation clearly. His name was Patrick Rourke, and he was young. Late 20s, she guessed, with the precise, efficient movements of someone who'd been trained to assess and act fast. He crouched down to her eye level, which was a thing she noted, because it meant he'd been trained well. "Can you tell me what's going on?" he said. She pulled up her sleeve. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at the red lines tracking up her forearm toward her elbow. Then he said, "Okay, how long? I noticed this morning. The cut. 3 days ago. Did you clean it?" "Yes. Are you running a fever? I don't have a thermometer." He stood. "Come with me. He comes too." Patrick Rourke looked at Ghost. Ghost was still facing outward, still in that precise, watchful stance, and something in the PA's expression shifted, not fear exactly, more like careful respect. "I'll need to check with. He stays with me or I walk." A pause. "He stays with you," Patrick Rourke said. They got her into a bed in the back corner of the ER, which was, she recognized, even through the fever, a concession. Corners meant walls on 2 sides. Ghost understood corners. He moved to her left and sat, and his shoulder touched her knee, and she felt her own pulse slow just slightly. The next hour was a sequence of things happening to her body that she endured with the particular stillness she'd developed over years of medical evaluations in the field. Blood draws, an IV line, a temperature reading that made Patrick Rourke's jaw tighten, vitals every 20 minutes. They used the word sepsis carefully, the way doctors used words they wanted to introduce without causing a patient to panic. She wasn't panicking, she was calculating. "How long will this take?" she asked. "Minimum 48 hours, Patrick said. "Possibly longer, depending on how your levels look at the 12-hour mark. 48 hours. She looked at Ghost. "There's no one who can take the dog?" Patrick asked. "There's no one," she said. It wasn't said with bitterness. It was simply the truth, stated plainly the way she stated most things. Patrick looked at Ghost again. Ghost had not moved, he had not made a sound, he had simply remained patient, alert, immovable, and something in the PA's expression was doing something complicated that Lydia was too exhausted to fully read. "I'll talk to the charge nurse," Patrick said. "We'll figure it out." She didn't sleep, exactly. She drifted in and out of something that wasn't rest, that was more like the body shutting down unnecessary functions to concentrate resources where they were needed. Ghost stayed beside the bed. She could feel him there the way she'd always been able to feel him, even in the dark, even in the noise of forward operating bases when everything was chaotic and loud, and the air smelled of diesel and cordite. He was a fixed point. He had always been her fixed point. She was somewhere in that grey drifting space when she heard the voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a voice at the nurse's station, maybe 15 feet from her curtained bay, asking a question, and it was the question that brought her back. "Is the dog okay in there?" She heard it and didn't move. She was listening without knowing she was listening, the way she'd listened for years, automatically, cataloguing sound before full consciousness could catch up. "He's fine," another voice said. "Hasn't moved an inch. What's his name?" "Pos Ghost, I think," the patient said. Silence. Then, Is it okay if I just need a minute?" The curtain shifted. Not much. 3 inches, maybe 4. Enough for a face to appear in the gap. A woman younger than Lydia, maybe 26, 27, with the kind of tired in her eyes that wasn't about sleep deprivation, but about something longer and heavier than that. She was wearing scrubs. There was a badge clipped to her collar that Lydia couldn't read from the bed. She was looking at Ghost. Ghost turned his head. The woman went very still. "Phantom," she said, barely above a whisper. And Ghost, who had not moved in 3 hours, who had not made a sound, who had held his position with military precision beside a hospital bed in a fluorescent litigar while IV machines beeped and strangers moved in and out of the bay. Ghost stood up. He took 2 steps toward the curtain, and he pressed his face into the gap and made a sound that Lydia had heard only a handful of times in 4 years. Not a whine, not a bark. Something lower than either of those. Something old. The woman pressed her hand against her mouth. Lydia sat up. "Hey," she said. The woman flinched. She hadn't realized Lydia was awake. She started to pull back, to close the curtain, to disappear, and Lydia said, "Don't." She said it quietly, not a command. Something closer to a request, and she didn't make requests easily. And something in her voice must have communicated that, because the woman stopped. "You knew him," Lydia said. Not a question, the woman looked at Ghost. Ghost was still pressed to the gap in the curtain. His tail, which had been still for 3 hours, was moving slowly. His name was Phantom, the woman said. Before. Before. Lydia understood before. Before was a container for a lot of things. "What's your name?" Lydia asked. "June," the woman said. "June Calloway." There was a long pause. Ghost made that low sound again. June Calloway pressed her hand harder against her mouth, and her eyes were wet, and she was clearly fighting something large and private. And Lydia, who had spent 2 years building walls against exactly this kind of moment, against the weight of other people's grief and her own, looked at the woman and felt something shift in her chest. Not break. Not open. Just shift, the way a locked door moves when someone puts pressure on it from the other side. "Come in," Lydia said. June Calloway came in. She sat in the chair beside the bed, the chair that Patrick Rourke had pushed toward Lydia earlier and that Lydia had ignored. She sat with her hands folded between her knees and Ghost's head in her lap, and she stroked his ears with the careful tenderness of someone relearning a language they thought they'd lost. "He was my husband's dog," she said. Lydia was quiet. Joel Calloway, he was a handler, 75th Ranger Regiment. June looked at Ghost over it gently. "They retired him when She stopped. "Started again when Joel was killed, 14 months ago. I didn't know what happened to Phantom after. They said he'd been rehomed to another veteran." She looked up. "I didn't know who." Lydia looked at Ghost, at June Calloway's hand on his ear. There were things she had not told anyone. Things she had carried up the logging road to the hollow in the foothills and locked behind the chain and the blackberry canes and the no trespassing signs, because locking them away was the only way she'd known how to keep moving. She had not been Joel Calloway's handler. She had not known him personally, but she had known his name because it was her unit's call that had redirected air support to the eastern grid on the day he was killed. And she had spent 14 months knowing that and not knowing how to carry it. And she had chosen the only way that felt survivable, which was to not carry it at all, to not let anyone close enough to make it real, to not speak his name, to not stand still long enough for the weight of it to land. She looked at June Calloway, at the quiet grief in her face, at Ghost who had laid his scarred head across this woman's knees with a trust that Lydia had thought he'd forgotten. "I was there," Lydia said. June looked up. "Not with him. Not directly." Lydia's voice was level. She had no other way to say hard things. "My team, we made a decision that day about where to direct resources. I've thought about it." She stopped, looked at the wall. "I've thought about it every day since." The room was very quiet. Outside the curtain, the ear continued its noise, the beeping, the footsteps, the distant murmur of voices. In here there was only the sound of Ghost breathing and the particular quality of silence that exists between two people when something true has been said. "It wasn't your fault," June Calloway said. Lydia didn't answer. "I've talked to enough people," June said. "I've read the reports. I've spent 14 months looking for someone to blame, because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do with it." She looked at Ghost. It wasn't a person's fault. It was a day. A series of things that happened too fast for any one person to control. She paused. Joel knew that. He talked about it. Not about that specific day, but about how it worked. How decisions got made. He didn't blame anyone when things went wrong. That wasn't who he was. Lydia's hands, folded in her lap, were very still. "He named the dog Phantom," June said softly, "because Joel said a good MWD was like a ghost. Always there, never seen, never heard unless he needed to be. And when he was there, you knew nothing was going to get through him." She scratched Ghost's jaw, and he pressed into her hand. "Joel always said that dog would outlove us all." Something moved through Lydia's chest. Not a wave, nothing dramatic, more like a tide coming in. So slowly you don't notice until you realize the water is at your knees. "He was mine when Joel was gone," she said. "I didn't name him. I just called him something else because I—" She stopped. She started again. "Because I couldn't keep calling him Phantom. It was too—" "I know," June said. Silence. "I'm sorry," Lydia said, "for your husband. And for—" She looked at June's hands on Ghost's head. "For keeping him from you, I didn't know. I would have—" "You took care of him," June said. "That's all Joel would have wanted." Lydia looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain in the tile, a brown ring, the size of a dinner plate. She focused on it the way she'd learned to focus on fixed points in hard moments. She did not cry. She had trained herself long ago out of that particular response. But there was something that moved through her, something that had been held still for 14 months. And it moved, and she let it move, and that was its own kind of release. Patrick Rourke came back 40 minutes later to check her vitals and found 2 women sitting in the corner bay with a Belgian Malinois lying across both their feet, and he was professional enough to say nothing beyond what was medically necessary. June Calloway had worked at Valley General for 8 months. She had taken the job after Joel died because she'd needed structure, and the hospital was the most structured place she could think of, and the overnight shifts kept her from lying in the apartment staring at the ceiling. She hadn't known, when she came on shift tonight, that the dog in Bay 7 was the same dog she'd helped Joel load into the military transport crate 4 years ago, the same dog whose ears she'd scratched on Joel's behalf when he was deployed, and she was the one responsible for the monthly welfare checks. She hadn't known. And then she'd heard the name. They talked through the night, not continuously, not without long silences, but steadily, the way people talk when they are both tired and have run out of reasons to be guarded. Lydia told her about the hollow, the 11 acres, the logging road she'd let fall into disrepair. June told her about the apartment, the overnight shifts, the way she'd started talking to Joel's photograph in the mornings, because it was the only conversation she trusted herself to have. Ghost slept across their feet, and his breathing was slow and even, and occasionally his legs moved in the way dogs' legs moved when they dreamed. Some mission, some scent trail, some remembered thing. At some point after 3 a.m., June said, "You can't keep living up there alone." "I know," Lydia said. It was the first time she had said it to anyone. It was the first time she had said it to herself. I'm not saying you need. I'm not saying you have to do anything differently. June looked at her steadily. I'm just saying I know what it looks like when someone is punishing themselves for something, because I spent 6 months doing the same thing, and it doesn't work. It doesn't make the thing smaller, it just makes you smaller. Lydia looked at the water stain in the ceiling tile. I don't know how to stop, she said. You start with breakfast, June said. That's what my sister told me. You start with just making something to eat, and then you do the next thing, and you don't have to figure out the whole rest of it. Silence. That sounds like advice you got from someone else, Lydia said. It is, and I ignored it for 3 months before I finally tried it. And it turned out. June paused. It turns out the simple things are simple for a reason. Ghost made a sound in his sleep, something between a sigh and a groan. Both women looked at him, and for a moment both of them almost smiled, and that was something. The 12-hour blood draw came back with numbers that made Patrick Rourke's face do something cautiously optimistic. He adjusted the antibiotic drip, explained what he was looking for. At the 24-hour mark, she noted that he said it without condescension, which she appreciated. June's shift ended at 7. She stood and gathered her things and stood at the curtain for a moment, and Lydia watched her, and Ghost watched her, and the morning light was coming through the high frosted window at the end of the corridor, and it was the grey-white light of a Pacific Northwest morning that never quite committed to brightness. Can I come back? June said. Lydia considered it the way she considered everything, directly. Without, she said. Yes. June nodded. She reached down and pressed her hand once to Ghost's head, his real name, his first name, the one that was Joel's, and then she straightened up and walked out through the curtain with the particular posture of someone who is holding themselves together carefully and doing it well. Ghost watched her go. Then he turned and looked at Lydia. She looked back at him. I know, she said. She had said those 2 words to him more than any others. He had heard her say them at the end of patrols, at the end of hard nights, at the end of long silences in the hollow, when the rain came down and the firs dripped and there was no sound but the woodstove and both of them breathing. He heard them now and lowered his head onto her knee, and she put her hand on the back of his neck. And they stayed that way while the morning came in through the frosted glass. She thought about 11 acres and a logging road. She thought about chain-link fences and blackberry canes and the careful architecture of being alone. She thought about how she had built it all to keep the weight out, and how the weight had been inside the whole time, in her own chest, in the space between her ribs where she breathed, in the thing that moved every night between the moment she closed her eyes and the moment she managed to sleep. She thought about Joel Calloway, who had named his dog for the quality of being present without being seen. She thought about what it meant that she had carried his dog up a mountain and called him something else and tried to outrun a grief that wasn't even hers to claim. The IV machine beeped. A nurse she hadn't seen before came in and checked the line without speaking. Outside the curtain, the day shift was beginning. Voices, footsteps, the particular frequency of a busy hospital morning. Ghost breathed. She breathed. When June came back that evening, she brought 2 cups of coffee from the cart in the lobby and sat in the chair by the bed and said nothing for a few minutes. And Lydia found, to her own faint surprise, that she did not need her to. The silence between them had changed overnight. It was no longer the silence of 2 strangers who don't know what to say. It was something different, the silence of 2 people who have said enough of the hard things that the easy ones no longer require filling. At some point, June said, Joel used to say that dog knew things before he did, about people, about situations and... That's true, Lydia said. They do. He trusted the dog more than his own instincts sometimes. That's also true. June looked at Ghost. He trusted you with Phantom, she said. Eventually, I mean. Before everything. He trusted whatever came after him to take care of him right. Lydia said nothing. I'm not trying to make you feel better, June said. I want you to know what I actually think, which is that the reason, Ghost, she stopped, corrected herself. The reason Phantom is okay is because someone took him somewhere quiet and just let him be a dog for a while, and that someone was you. I don't know if I'm okay, she said. I know, June said. I'm not either. But I think, she stopped, thought, started again. I think we can be not okay somewhere that isn't alongside. The rain started. They both heard it at the same time, the way it hit the high frosted window, soft at first, and then steady, the sound of a Pacific Northwest evening settling into itself. Ghost lifted his head, listened, put it back down. The standoff, the long, silent, 2-year standoff Lydia Farrow had been waging against anything that might require her to feel something, was officially over. Not with a surrender, not with a breakdown, just with 2 cups of coffee and a sleeping dog, and the rain coming down outside a hospital window, and somewhere in the quiet between 2 people who had both been carrying the same grief from opposite ends, something loosening, something that had been clenched for 14 months beginning, slowly, to open its hand.